You smiled today. 3 times before 9 a.m. Once at the neighbor you don't like. Once at the colleague who takes credit for your work. Once at your phone. At a message that made your stomach drop because the person on the other end might have seen a pause before your reply and interpreted it as coldness. And you cannot be cold. You are the good person. You have been the good person for as long as you can remember. The one who stays late. The one who says, of course, no problem. The one who swallows the thing they actually wanted to say and replaces it with something softer, something easier, something that keeps the room comfortable, at the cost of keeping you invisible. And somewhere between the neighbor and the colleague and the text message, you felt it again, that specific hollow exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep, the kind that lives behind your eyes, the kind that has been there so long. You've started to think it's just your personality. It isn't. Nobody is born the good person. They are built, carefully, over years, by a specific set of conditions that teach a child one foundational lesson. Your value is conditional on your behavior. Level 1, the household. You grew up in a home where love was expressed through approval. Not necessarily a cruel home, not necessarily a dramatic one, but a home where the temperature of the room changed depending on what you did, where a good grade meant warmth, where a mistake meant withdrawal, where being difficult, having needs, expressing anger, saying no, carried a cost that a child's nervous system learns very quickly is not worth paying. So you adapted. You became easy. You became agreeable. You became the child that adults pointed to and said, "Why can't you be more like them?" And every time they said it, a small, invisible wire tightened around the part of you that knew how to want things for yourself. Level 2, the school. School confirmed everything home taught you. The good person got gold stars. The good person was trusted with responsibility. The good person was liked by teachers in that specific way that feels like safety. When you are 10 years old and safety is the thing you are most desperately optimizing for. But school also introduced something new, social consequence. You watched what happened to children who were difficult, who talked back, who said what they thought, who took up space unapologetically. Some of them were admired, but many of them were punished. By teachers, by peers, by the invisible social machinery that rewards compliance and isolates deviation, and you filed that information away in the part of your brain that is exclusively dedicated to not being left out. Level 3, the identity. And then, so gradually it felt like nothing. The performance became the person. You stopped pretending to be agreeable and became someone who genuinely believed that their needs were less important than other people's comfort. You stopped suppressing anger and became someone who genuinely didn't feel it, or so you thought. What actually happened is that the anger went underground. It didn't disappear. It just stopped announcing itself and started expressing itself in ways you didn't recognize as anger. The exhaustion, the low-grade resentment you can't quite locate, the way certain people's names make your body tense before your mind even processes why. Let's be specific, because the good person is not one thing. They are a collection of roles, each one built to serve a different audience, each one costing a different piece of who they actually are. Rank 1, the peacekeeper. You are the person who steps in when there is conflict. Not because you are brave, because the conflict makes you physically uncomfortable in a way that other people seem to be able to tolerate, and you cannot. You smooth things over. You find the middle ground. You translate person A to person B until they can stand to be in the same room again. And everyone calls you diplomatic. Everyone calls you mature. What they don't see is that you have never, not once, allowed yourself to be in conflict long enough to find out what you actually believe, because the moment you take a side is the moment someone might not like you, and that remains, at a cellular level, an unacceptable outcome. Rank 2, the fixer. You are the person everyone calls when things fall apart. And they call you not because you are the most qualified, though you often are, but because you will say yes, because you have never, in living memory, said, I can't right now, because your boundaries are so well hidden that most people in your life have genuinely never encountered one. And here is the brutal arithmetic of being the fixer. Every problem you solve for someone else is a problem you solved instead of resting, instead of creating, instead of pursuing the things that you, specifically, came here to do. You have spent years being the solution to other people's lives, while your own life sits in a drawer, labeled when I have time. You never have time. The fixer never has time, because the fixer made a decision, long before they were conscious enough to understand it, that being needed is safer than being wanted. Needed means permanent. Wanted can disappear. Rank 3. The understander. This is the role that costs the most, because it is the most invisible. You are the person who always finds a way to understand why someone hurt you. They were going through something. They didn't mean it that way. You know how they grew up. You know what they're dealing with. And so the hurt, which was real, which was valid, which deserved to be named and addressed, gets quietly filed away, under understandable narration, the sharpest moment in the script, and over years, you have understood yourself into a corner. You have been so generous with context for everyone who has ever let you down, that you have built a life in which no one has ever been fully accountable to you, not because they are all bad people, but because you trained them through consistent, loving, exhausting understanding that there is no cost to disappointing you. Rank 4. The self-eraser. And underneath all the roles, beneath the peacekeeper and the fixer and the understander, is the role that makes all the others possible. The self-eraser, the part of you that has spent a lifetime making yourself smaller, quieter, easier to be around, by systematically removing the parts of you that might cause friction, your opinions, your ambitions, your anger, your specific, particular, unrepeatable way of seeing the world, which you have learned to introduce only carefully, only when invited, only in doses small enough that no one feels overwhelmed by the fact of you. You have become so good at disappearing in plain sight that some of the people closest to you would struggle vast right now to tell you what you actually want, not what you've said you want, not the polished, considerate, everybody-friendly version, what you actually want, the raw, specific, selfish, completely legitimate truth of it. They don't know, because you never told them, because you were too busy being good. Let's count it, not to make you feel sorry for yourself, but because you have never actually let yourself count it. The career. There is a version of your professional life that you chose because it was responsible, because it wouldn't make people uncomfortable, because the thing you actually wanted to do seemed too much, too bold, too uncertain to you, and so you filed it away and chose the version that got nodded at approvingly by the people whose approval you had decided was the measure of a good decision. How many years ago was that? The relationships. There are people in your life right now who you would not choose if you were choosing freely. People you maintain out of history, out of obligation, out of the fear that ending something makes you the bad person, and you cannot, under any circumstances, be the bad person. And so you stay, you show up, you answer, you give energy you do not have to connections that do not fill you, because the alternative, the clean, honest, self-respecting alternative, requires you to disappoint someone. And disappointing someone, the good person has always believed, is a form of violence. It isn't. It is a form of honesty. And honesty is the one thing the good person was never taught to be. The self. This is the one that cannot be quantified. How many times have you had a thought a real, sharp, true thought, and immediately translated it into something more palatable. Before it reached your mouth, how many times have you felt something and immediately asked yourself, but is this fair to feel? As though your own emotional experience required a justification panel before it was allowed to exist? How many versions of yourself have you quietly retired because they were inconvenient for the comfort of people around you? You don't know because you stopped counting so long ago that you've forgotten what the original version even looked like. And here is the question that makes all of this genuinely hard. Not should you stop being good? That's the wrong question. The real question is, who are you if you stop performing goodness for an audience? Because here is the fear that has kept the good person in their role for decades. If I stop being agreeable, if I say what I think, if I take up space, if I disappoint people, if I choose myself, will there be anything left worth choosing? Option 1, the overcorrection. You decide you're done. You've read the self-help books. You've watched the videos. You know about people-pleasing and fawning responses, and anxious attachment, and you are finished. You set every boundary at once. You say no to everything. You go cold. And the people around you, who knew you only as the good person, experience it as an attack. Because it is, in a way. It's not healing. It's whiplash. And the relationships that might have survived. A gradual, honest renegotiation. Don't survive the sudden version. You end up free but alone. And mistake the loneliness for proof that you needed the performance after all. Image prompt. A minimalist flat vector illustration in the style of Professor POV, featuring bold black lines on a solid white background. A figure stands at the center of the frame, arms crossed, posture closed and rigid. Around the figure, other figures lean away, some mid-step, retreating. The central figure's boundary is total and impenetrable. But the space it creates is not peaceful, it is stark. The figure stands in a circle of empty space that looks less like freedom and more like quarantine. Option 2, the gradual renegotiation. Slower, harder, more honest. You begin one conversation at a time to introduce the actual version of yourself. Not as a rebellion, as an introduction. Actually, I don't want to do that. I need to tell you something honestly. I'm not available for this right now. Small sentences. Enormous courage. Some people will adapt. They will find, to their own surprise, that they prefer this version. That the real you is more interesting, more present, more genuinely warm than the performance ever was. Some people will not adapt. And their inability to accept the real version of you will tell you something about the relationship that you needed to know and were too busy performing goodness to ever find out. Option 2, the gradual renegotiation. Slower, harder, more honest. You begin one conversation at a time to introduce the actual version of yourself. Not as a rebellion, as an introduction. Actually, I don't want to do that. I need to tell you something honestly. I'm not available for this right now. Small sentences. Enormous courage. Some people will adapt. They will find, to their own surprise, that they prefer this version. That the real you is more interesting, more present, more genuinely warm than the performance ever was. Some people will not adapt. And their inability to accept the real version of you will tell you something about the relationship that you needed to know and were too busy performing goodness to ever find out. Option 3, the reckoning. You stop asking for permission to exist as you are. Not loudly, not as a declaration, just quietly, irrevocably. You decide that your needs are not a burden you must apologize for, that your opinions do not require softening to be worth saying, that the people who only love the performance of you were never, in any meaningful sense, loving you, and you grieve that. You grieve it properly, because it is a real loss, the loss of a version of belonging that felt like safety, even as it was slowly taking everything and then you build something new, on the only foundation that has ever actually held anything, the truth of who you are. When no one is watching, and you have nothing left to perform, you smiled today, 3 times before 9 a.m. But here is what I want you to consider. Before you smile the 4th time, what would happen if the next smile was real, not performed for the neighbor, not deployed to manage the colleague, not calculated to prevent a misreading, just real, because you felt something genuine, and let it show. The good person spent a lifetime believing that their value lived in their usefulness, that love was something you earned through consistent, exhausting, selfless service to everyone else's comfort, that wanting things, real things, selfish things, yours alone things, was a character flaw to be managed. It was never a flaw. It was always just a human being who was taught too young that the cost of being real was too high to pay. You have been good long enough. Not good as in moral, not good as in kind. Keep the kindness, it is genuinely yours, but good as in palatable, good as in convenient, good as in safe for everyone else. That version of good never belonged to you anyway. It belonged to the fear, and the fear has collected enough. You don't have to stop being good. You just have to start being honest about what it costs you, and then, for the first time, decide if you're still willing to pay. Tag someone who needs to hear this. They won't share it themselves. They're too busy being good.